welcome everybody to our Sourcepass panel discussion today on incident response and disaster recovery. I'm Dave Del Vecchio, the VP of Marketing and Communications for Sourcepass, and I'm happy you're going to take some time today to join us for this discussion. As luck would have it, we had an example of why this is a relevant topic just earlier today, in that we had a client of ours who is a medical practice contact us after hours, about 5 o'clock in the morning, to let us know that they had a water leak in their building that was starting to seep into their server room. So our teams had to enact our incident response plan and escalations to get someone on site. We got someone there by 8 o'clock in the morning. We're able to, in the interim, while they were getting on site, work with the client to identify key information, get out of harm's way, and then get it reset up in a temporary space and get the client back online live by 8:30, so they were able to continue operations while they've got teams working on remediating the pipe leak. So it just tended to be a good time to reinforce that a lot of the triggering events we'll be talking more about today can really happen randomly at any time. And they always say if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So hopefully we can help you plan to succeed as we go through this discussion today. This is also a follow-up to a couple of previous webinars that we've run. And if you haven't checked them out before, I wanted to direct you to the link that I have on the bottom of the screen. If you go to our sourcepass.com website, you'll find our video library. And in that video library, we had a discussion about disaster recovery planning back in the spring. The idea for this webinar came out of some feedback we received on that one, where folks wanted to get a better idea, not just from a backup standpoint, but in a slightly broader scheme, how different teams kind of work together when these sorts of events occur. And so in order to do that, I've brought some friends along, and we're going to be covering a decent amount of ground with you today. To begin, we're going to have a little bit of a Sourcepass overview just to set the stage, and then we're going to provide some definitions. What is a triggering event? What is incident response? What is disaster recovery? Just to level set our conversation. Once we go through that, we're going to open up our discussion to our panelists, and we're going to run through some scenarios to kind of discuss how various teams work together depending on the type of scenario. And then at the end, we'll open it up to Q&A. And so if you have any incident response or disaster recovery questions you'd like to have addressed, feel free to think those out. And you could submit those at any time through our Q&A, which is being monitored by Kat Irizarry from our marketing team, who'd be happy to hear from you. So she's monitoring the back end for us today. So let me introduce you a little bit to myself and our team. As I said, I'm Dave Del Vecchio, the VP of Marketing and Communications for Sourcepass. Prior to that, I was the president of one of the companies that integrated into Sourcepass about 2.5 years ago. So I've got about over 30 years of experience working in IT services and specifically IT outsourcing and managed services. I've been doing this long enough to remember Y2K. I was sick as a dog that night, and which helps me remember it as well, because Y2K could have, the whole world could have ended and it would have been okay for me at that particular moment. I was that sick. But I've been doing this support since before the Windows 95 launch, so it's been a while. When I'm not talking IT, I also tend to play bass in a band and mostly 80s, 90s sort of cover tunes, and enjoy that outside of my life of Sourcepass and IT. First team member I want to introduce you to is Germany Kashi, who is part of our cyber risk advisory program. Germany, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Thanks, Dave. So just a quick introduction about me. I've been in IT since 2013, but have been, dabbling in the IT world since before that. I'm a Microsoft security expert. I have multiple certifications with Microsoft that I leverage every day to be able to do my role here at Sourcepass. Part of my role here is really doing assessments, compliance, gap analysis, and third-party risk management. So I enjoy everything here at Sourcepass. On my off time, I also am a licensed soccer coach, so I like to get with the kids, and I have trainings that we do on the weekends, and something to offset all the security in my life. So that's a little bit about me.
Very cool. And let's add Anna to the party. Anna?
Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Liskey. I'm an incident response analyst here at Sourcepass's SOC team. I've been in cybersecurity since 2021. I actually went to college for it. I got my master's in information assurance and cybersecurity. Something I really love about being in this role is just how the threat landscape is always evolving, and I'm always learning something. That goes with continued education, certifications, learning about new threats and methods that we're observing in the environments now. I really do love what I do, and it's awesome to be able to help our clients remediate and kind of contain incidents as they come through. It's fun. There's always something new to learn, and keeps me busy. Outside of work, I just really love nature and being out hiking. And I took on photography as well. For specifically, I really love the sunsets and ocean photography. That's like my favorite thing.
Very cool. And the last member of our dream team today is Zach Cetus, our senior backup and DR manager. Zach.
Yeah, hi. My name is Zach. I've been with Sourcepass for almost 2 years now. I've done quite a bit of different things in the IT industry, including teaching at a community college, which was a lot of fun. As a senior backup disaster recovery manager, I work closely on aligning our backup solutions and disaster recovery solutions for all of our clients. So they're all on the same page and have reliable backups with quick recovery time and point objectives. And in the NOC department here, we like to think of ourselves as doing preventative maintenance, ready to act in the case of a DR scenario or a recovery scenario.
Very cool. And for those who might not be familiar with the phrase NOC, NOC is NOC, Network Operations Center, with backup and recovery being a major component of our network operations team. So we're going to take Zach in Germany and Anna off screen as I start the presentation and lead you through some of the introductory points. So for some of our guests who aren't familiar with us, Sourcepass is about 600 employees, over 2,000 clients, with a national reach, with local presence in 9 different geographies. And among our journey over the last couple of years, we've attained AICPA SOC 2 Type 2 certification, as well as ISO 27001 certification. And the reason that's applicable in this discussion is as part of those certification processes, we had to document things like our disaster recovery plan and actually demonstrate that we had these sorts of incident response plans and disaster recovery plans in place for our own business. So not only are we helping to consult our clients, but we take this seriously internally as well. Also want to point out our Gartner mention as a member of the Magic Quadrant for ODWS for the mid-market. ODWS is outsourced digital workplace services, and it's somewhat abnormal for Gartner to call out a company by name as a leader in an emerging field like that. And Sourcepass was the only company that was mentioned by them as a leader in that field. So it's through this sort of thought leadership that we're able to hopefully add value to your engagement with us as we move through your IT journey. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. All of these sorts of events tend to get triggered by some sort of a triggering event. What is a triggering event? It's simply some sort of an incident or tangible or intangible barrier or occurrence that once it occurs, it causes other events to occur thereafter. So as we talk about what normally would kick this off in the example I gave at the outset, a burst pipe was the triggering event for what led our medical client through their incident this morning. So keep in mind, we'll talk more and define what triggering events are, and we're going to give you examples in our panel discussion as we talk through how various scenarios work depending on the type of triggering event that we're discussing. So what is incident response? It refers to an organization's processes and procedures that allow them to detect and respond primarily to security breaches and cyber attacks. I guess by its truest definition, incidents don't necessarily have to be cyber related, but from an IT standpoint, as Anna offered in her introduction, she's a member of our SOC or security operations team. And so incident response is specifically looking for those potential triggering events that are related to cybersecurity concerns or from cybersecurity sources. So what is disaster recovery? Disaster recovery is the collection of all of the IT technologies and best practices designed to prevent or minimize data loss from any sort of business disruption caused by one of those triggering events. whether it's a pipe burst, whether it's a hurricane, which we'll talk about a little bit. Disaster recovery is the collection of all of those various processes and technologies. So quite often what you'll find is businesses will put together three kind of corollary types of plans: an incident response plan, a disaster recovery plan, and a business continuity plan. So let's define what each one of those are and what they accomplish. So an incident response plan that gets triggered by an event usually involves some sort of a triggering event that deals with either the physical, technical, or administrative controls that usually lead to some sort of a cybersecurity risk or incident. They tend to be shorter in duration, but they require very fast response. They're triggered quite often. You'll hear people refer to triggering events as boom events, kind of like a bomb going off. It's something that all of a sudden changes your paradigm and demands your attention immediately. So it tends to be shorter in duration and a little bit more intense in the engagement. Your disaster recovery plan focuses on restoring your IT back to a baseline functionality. So the example given at the outset of our discussion, the pipe burst, that reaction to get a technician on site, first, helping our client make sure that their equipment didn't get damaged, moved it to a safe location, then we set it up temporarily, allowed them to work in a temporary out of a temporary location. We set that equipment up. That's all part of the disaster recovery plan. And now, as they continue to work through that plan, they remediate the water leak. Part of that plan is also going to entail the recovery steps to actually be able to return that equipment back to its rightful place. Those are all the sorts of things that would be contained within a disaster recovery plan. A business continuity plan just goes to the nth degree and goes beyond just the technology controls, but all of your business functions that would have to be addressed in some sort of a larger scale event. Think fire, right? Your building burns to the ground. Well, it's going to be low on the priority list, but if you get delivery from, water for water coolers in those 5-gallon, blue plastic jugs, if your building's out of commission for 6 months, you probably need to cancel and suspend that service and then restore it when you get access to the building and the fire damage is remediated. Those sorts of things would be contained in a business continuity plan, but wouldn't be reflected in an incident response or disaster recovery because it's not either security or IT related. So the plans will cross over and intersect. The areas where they differ tend to be in that immediacy of incident response as much or more so than the other two, and in duration. Where it also differs is for our three guests, where you've got Germany, who works in risk advisory. They're often engaged pre-disaster, in pre-event, because they're helping businesses think through and plan for these sorts of events. So their engagement begins much earlier. Incident response typically gets involved right when that triggering event occurs and when it's the security related. And network operations can really happen anywhere along the continuum because they can be looped in as part of the planning process as well to design a recovery plan that works according to any business's needs. But from a technical standpoint, typically, they're jumping in those disaster recovery scenarios and to recover IT. So they interrelate at different points throughout this process. Another way to look at how the three teams work together can be mapped to what's known as the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF. NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technologies. It's a division of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And starting back in 2014, they published their first cybersecurity framework program, which started with, at the highest level, 5 core functions of technology and data protection. You identify where that key critical data exists. You then put the appropriate protection layers in place to keep that information safe. You have to put detection in place to be able to detect if unauthorized access is occurring. That's where incident response comes in. Then you respond to the incidents that are legitimate, separating the wheat from the chaff, because quite often incident response will be dealing with false positives or things that could be indicators of compromise, which is the phrase for, if there's an indicator of compromise, they have to go through the analysis to determine if it is truly a triggering event or if it's a false positive. That's what Anna does all day, every day. And then, of course, network operations kind of kicks in as part of that recovery, the fifth phase, and identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. But again, while these are their primary roles, they can span. And, incident response and network ops is often part of the identifying protection phase as well, to make sure that their needs, if they're needed from a detection, response, recovery standpoint, are in place. So let's go back and talk a little bit more about triggering events. So there are many different things that could be a triggering event. Natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, those sorts of things, floods. Thinking of all of those folks in like the Carolinas that were dealing with flooding earlier this year. There are a lot of businesses that had to enact their disaster recovery plans in those areas because of natural disaster. There can be man-made disasters, chemical spills. I've got an anecdote I'll share later about a client of ours from many years ago that dealt with a challenge due to a chemical spill outside their building. You could have utility failures, particularly for those of us in the Northeast. I'm up in Massachusetts. Sometimes you get those big snowstorms that'll knock out power regionally. You've got to be able to account for that if you live in an area like I do that has a higher propensity for those sorts of issues. You got to prepare for intentional sabotage. Sometimes you have a malicious actor inside your own network, and how do you prepare for that? And then, of course, those external threats like cybersecurity. So it takes a lot of what if goes into the planning and making sure that you have plans in place for all sorts of different triggering events. And that's why with that background, we want to lead into a little bit of a panel discussion to share with you some of the thought process that goes into the planning and the recovery should any of these sorts of events occur. So with that, I'm going to offer our first scenario, and I'm going to bring my guests back on stage. So let's reintroduce Zach and Germany and Anna to the group. And so the first scenario we're going to talk through with everybody is you've got a Cat 3 hurricane that is going to be making landfall in about 2 days, and you have to prepare for that unexpected landfall that's going to affect your geography. So why don't we start with Germany, talk a little bit from a planning standpoint. How does risk advisory work with clients to maybe help with some of the preparations to have a plan in place before this scenario becomes a potential triggering event?
Yeah, of course. So the risk advisory really is here for the planning. One of the things that we like to start out as part of the risk advisory package here is we like to start out with a risk assessment. When it comes to a Category 3 hurricane or any hurricane really, and we're thinking about planning and we have 2 days ahead of time, being realistic, 2 days ahead of time might not be a great amount of time for you to prepare because there's a lot of things to look into, right? We have to look at how we can minimize disruption for emergencies like this, right? We have to really plan ahead if we want to be prepared. Because like Dave said earlier, it's better to plan ahead than be dealing with the issue right when it happens. Because people notoriously are not great at handling situations like this as it comes up. So planning is key, right? We want to be able to identify those critical business functions. That could be assets and dependencies, right? Like systems that you have that you absolutely need to personnel and vendors that you might require for your daily operational needs. So planning, as always, is the best thing you can do. Planning ahead of time, getting things like a risk assessment to identify your gaps and work to mitigate those ahead of time is always the best way to go, right? Hurricane-specific disaster preparedness, when it comes to that, we want to know, hey, if a hurricane happens and our systems are down, what are our critical assets? Do we need to stay online? Do we need our phone systems up? Do we need to set up infrastructure protection? That could be barriers to the organization, flood barriers, reinforced windows. But another thing to think about when we're doing the infrastructure protection is backup protections. If we think about backups, you could have backups locally in your environment. And thinking about if something were to happen to your environment and impact those backups, it might make it a little harder for you to get back online. Having cloud backups in this scenario as well is something that really would be beneficial in this point, and I can let Zach talk a little bit on that after I get through here. But having those cloud backups will keep you in a better security predicament than having those locals affected, and then you have no way to be able to get back online after this event has happened, really. The other thing that I brought up a little bit ahead of time was that vendor and supply chain readiness. If we have vendors that are in the area, they likely are dealing with hurricane preparation as well. It's good to be able to reach out to them or have some type of agreement in place that outlines what they do in the event of a hurricane or a natural disasters. Now, having vendors all over the place, as such as different areas of the U.S., they might not be bogged down by something like a hurricane, but having that clear communication path to your vendors and having a clear idea of what you should be worried about and who you should be reaching out to in the case of a hurricane or a specific scenario where you may not be able to reach certain services. As any natural disaster or any event, employee safety is top priority. So in these scenarios, making sure that our team is safe and we have clear evacuation protocols or remote work plans is ideal. Having some type of communication pipeline that you can reach out to your organization or your employees to let them know and give them updates on business disruptions or when we plan on getting back in office. That is also something that we here in the risk advisory will kind of gather the evidence for and help you create a customized plan that actually meets your organizational needs. Having these steps, these recovery steps in place, obviously lets you be more proactive than reactive, that when something actually does happen, you're prepared and you know exactly where to go to find what you need, and you know the services that are critical to you and that you need to maintain online at all times to be able to function and really continue business operations. So that's a little bit about what we here in the risk advisory do. Some of the backup measures, like I said, we deal with the cloud backups, and we can help and assist in setting that up. And I think Zach's team has a little bit more insight on how they can recover in the event that we do need to use those backups.
Yeah, Zach, so why don't you tell us a little bit about how cloud backup works and how it would help in a scenario like this?
Yeah, so it's important to have obviously multiple backups at different locations for this scenario. Local backups are good for quick restores and things like that, but if you don't have a local location anymore due to a hurricane, you might need to have a cloud backup. But past cloud backup, is it also disaster recovery enabled? And what that means is, are you able to take those local servers that you have on at your site, and can you spin those up? Can you turn those on into a cloud recovery environment? And then can your users or those people that have been identified by risk advisory, can those people connect to those cloud servers to continue doing their work and help make sure that the day-to-day can continue? Obviously, there's going to be some difficulties still with not having a local site to still call home or not be able to go into and work from, but at least we have that ability to recover fail over to a cloud infrastructure and continue to work. And then from there, once maybe cleanup has happened and you're starting to go back into the office, we have the ability to start what's called a failback, and that actually leaves the server in the cloud and then starts to trickle down the information to a local server while it's still being used in the cloud. And then after the majority of that has completed, we can do a switch over, which we shut down the cloud environment, do that last recovery, that little maybe 100 gigs or so, and then turn it on locally. So you're able to continue work while we do the recovery, which is pretty cool too.
Yeah, very cool. And we've used the hurricane as the example, but really this is representative of any sort of scenario that occurs where you're dealing with a regional, geographically impactful event. It could be a major snowstorm, major outage, if you're on a coast, tidal flooding, those sorts of things. And so I wanted to give an example because Germany touched on this as he was discussing it. Many years ago, we were doing some work with a financial institution their first draft of their disaster recovery plan, in order to what they were going to do if their on-premise equipment was damaged due to some sort of an event like this, was to overnight in replacement equipment. And we had to kind of walk them through the logic of that if we're dealing with a hurricane, UPS is probably not showing up tomorrow with an overnight package either. And so, thinking through the depth and the breadth of the impact and what that means not only on your own operations, but the operations of others is a critical component as well. So.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dave. And one thing that I think I can add to that is when we're thinking about preparedness and disaster recovery and business continuity, it really depends on your organization as well. It's always great to be proactive, right? But you may have to be proactive. It may be required by regulations, depending on what kind of information you're working with. There's certain regulations and frameworks such as CMMC and HIPAA and other frameworks that require you to have a disaster recovery plan and be prepared in the event something were to happen and PII sensitive information is not available. You need to be well ahead of schedule on that. You need to be prepared. So it can be mandated in certain certain frameworks.
Great point. Let's move on to scenario 2. So in scenario 2, it's a much more localized event. In this case, you had an unexpected power outage and surge, and the equipment did not like dealing with that. It did not survive the event. Your main servers and storage area network device failed. So your local servers and storage are now offline and are not going to be coming back up. So Zach, why don't we start with you this time? We touched a little bit about it, the capabilities in the first scenario, but having a cloud-based backup that you could do that sort of emergency failover to would be critical here, would it not?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that can affect anybody, anywhere. It's not, just people that are maybe in the hurricane zone or something like that. Hardware failure can happen at any time. And what's important is to have an on-prem device that you're backing up to, not only for really quick, fast local recovery, but something that is able to, say, bring up a server locally. So what we do is we set up a server and put that on site. All it does is it backs up all of the servers at your location. If something goes down, we can bring that server, virtualize it. It's called a local failover, and it'll act as your server until we can fix the hardware failure, until we can get somebody on site and then recover that local failover onto the new production equipment. Some interesting things there is recovery time objective is very important with recovering anything. And one thing we have with local recovery is very quick recovery time objective. And we don't have to wait for the internet traffic to go bring down a full server and recover to existing hardware. You have that local network connection to recover from and utilize for quick recovery. One of the other things is testing those backups. And if you're able to use that or have an on-site appliance is great, but are you able to virtualize that and automate that test is important to see. Can you back up server A, and does server A locally fail over on that appliance? Does that happen every month or week, or depending on what we need to do, we're able to say, yes, we have a local snapshot that works. This is, you can turn that into your auditors or anybody to prove like, hey, my IT team is able to spin up a local failover in the event of a hardware failure. And I think that's very important. And then we can also do live production testing as well. So we can actually bring down a server purposely off hours typically, and then spin it up locally to say, hey, this is what would happen if we were to have a hardware failure, and this is the steps that we would take, and how quickly it would be to bring you back up from that hardware failure.
Yeah, great point. And you know, your tip about testing, there are some industries, to one of the points Germany made earlier, there are some industries that are dealing with regulatory requirements when it comes to some of these topics. And I know financial institutions typically have their state division of banks and FDIC if they are a bank, and NCUA for credit unions. They have to go through regular testing of their disaster recovery plans. But they're one of the few industries that does religiously, partly because of those requirements. For all of the other industries who aren't necessarily mandated to have to do these tests regularly, quite often they get backburnered in favor of other projects. But the last thing you want to do is have the first time you try to do a recovery be the first time you actually try to do the recovery. I know that when we've done testing for clients, every time we run the test, we learn something about the process that could be improved to improve the result the next time, increasing the recovery, decreasing the recovery time, and narrowing the recovery point so that it's more effective. So test should be a key takeaway of today's session. So, and then from a technology standpoint, there's different ways to approach this, but we did talk a little bit about the continuous data protection. For those in a lot of industries, you can't risk a recovery and losing certain transactional data. This does come with an extra cost, quite typically, and different solutions are required for different scenarios. But if you are in an industry where if you have an incident, you need to have the data that's recovered be as absolutely recent as possible, right up to the split second of when the triggering event occurred. There are solutions to discuss that will, including under the umbrella of what's known as continuous data protection, that should be able to narrow those recovery points down so you're recovering as recent data as possible. So have your discussions with your VCIOs and your strategic advisors. So we're going to kick this now and give Anna a chance to shine. So let's talk through scenario 3, ransomware attempt. Bad guys are inside your defenses. So let's say, for example, the an administrator user in your environment fell for a phishing email and accidentally gave their credentials to a bad actor. Anna, how does that typically start to show up on your radar, and what sort of steps does incident response take to analyze it and respond?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dave. So I like to think of incident response as almost like the special forces of cybersecurity. We're engaging directly with cyber threats, and we use a variety of tools and suites to kind of detect and analyze and mitigate these attacks. Some of them being obviously phishing, social engineering. A lot of those come into play here. So let's say an indicator of compromise is detected. It's basically just a clue that something's gone wrong. We're able to see within the environment that a piece of data is suggesting that a system, an account, in the ransomware's perspective, it's going to be most likely a system or a server, that this endpoint has been compromised or breached. For example, we might see unusual network traffic or unexpected changes to a system, deletion of files, abnormal user activity. This all ties into forming that threat landscape that we're using to analyze and pinpoint exactly the origin of where this compromise is coming from, and allows us to kind of delve deeper into that. Some common tactics that we see are phishing attacks, like you had mentioned. We see a lot of deceptive tricks that are getting end users to reveal credentials. It could be a malicious phishing link, let's say. They open that up, it's just an email. It looks like it's from their HR department. They could go ahead and click on that link. It's going to direct them to a fraudulent link somewhere else that's posing as Microsoft 365. That's kind of where that first credential theft will occur. Social engineering is a really broad tactic. It can manipulate into divulging this type of information. It targets anyone from an organization. Another thing too that we see more commonly with ransomwares are vulnerability exploits. So unpatched software, firewall needs an update, that firmware is vulnerable to some type of existing vulnerability out there that a threat actor or a team has kind of harnessed and understands how to bypass. This type of incident is especially detrimental just due to the volume of potential data that could be lost, and tying into backup and recovery. If a client doesn't have an adequate backup or available backups, or let's say the backups were compromised throughout that ransomware event, it can be very difficult for a organization to come back from something like this due to just that sheer volume of data loss. We also do see, in some cases, insider threats in terms of deploying ransomware. Let's say and we'll get to that in later slides, but it could be an internal threat where an employee, let's say, sends a piece of code because they're angry or whatever the case may be, and that could also trigger a ransomware event as well. Some of the risks too that we see with ransomware especially is the data exfiltration. That's just a fancy term for data theft. So obviously it will involve the unauthorized transfer of data from a system, and this will pose significant risks for everyone in the organization. The loss of sensitive information and potential regulatory penalties, that's something that all of these teams have to work together to understand, speak with cyber insurance, and just have an understanding of the environment as a whole so that different aspects of infrastructure and IT environment can be secured properly and remediated properly.
Yeah, great point. So, let's talk about the backup aspect of it again. So, Zach, I know, some new technology. Actually, it's not that new anymore. But to kind of combat the risk that when bad guys get access to an environment, quite often the first thing they tend to target are backups because they want to prevent the ability for the person that they're attacking to be able to recover without paying the ransom. So why don't you define for us immutable backups and how it helps prevent that risk?
Yeah, absolutely. So as it says here on the slide, I mean, immutable backups basically means once the backup is taken, it can't be deleted or tampered with. And one, that's very important, but also when we're talking about data and maybe the flow of data, it's important how those backups get to their destination. One of the things that we do is we also encrypt our backups. So from point A to point B, and then when it rests at point B, the backups are encrypted with a unique encryption key. So they can't be deleted with immutable backups, and then they can't also be tampered with or adjusted with unless you have that encryption key. I think it's really important to have, this goes back to our local and cloud backup plans. One of the unique things that we do is we have a local backup plan that is independent of our cloud backup plan. So we're not replicating our backups from our local device to the cloud. In case something happens to that local device, we're not replicating that issue into the cloud. So we have a separate cloud backup plan to ensure that, hey, we have something that's completely different, completely separate, and immutable and encrypted in case something happens locally across the site in a pretty bad scenario.
Yep, nice. And as we talked about with some of the other advanced backup solutions, sometimes there are trade-offs. It might not be direct cost for additional licensing, but in this case, if you set your backups to never be deleted, it tends to mean you're going to take up a lot of storage for your backup files. So sometimes it means needing to account for the fact that if you're going to keep your backups around forever because they can't be tampered with, you got to make sure you got plenty of storage to be able to store those files indefinitely. So just things to keep in mind as you design an overall solution.
That's a good point, Dave. We can still, with immutable backups, we can still apply retention plans. So say you want to only keep a year's worth of backups. Those backups after a year, they'll be deleted by our backup solution. So you don't keep everything, but within that year, there's no way anybody can delete anything. I even mentioned, having the encryption key. If you even have that, you can't delete it. I can't delete any backups that have immutable storage on them, which just goes to show like how much protection is around those. not even administrators, can delete these. So it's completely protected, and for any risk at all to just keep those backups until that retention period kicks in, and so keeps your data safe.
And this is a great example, actually, to kick it back to Germany, and with the point that if whatever you technically set those retention policies to be, that they have to be reflected in whatever your written policies are, because the bigger no-no of not having a written policy that dictates these sort of things is not be following the written policy. So making sure that this is where the collaboration between the teams is important, that if we're documenting that retention of that data is only going to be done for a year, that it reflects that in the policy, that the actual administration of the tool is configured that way. And if the client is in a regulated industry, it meets whatever requirements they might have for their industry, and that they're actually doing what they say they should be doing, and making sure that everything is in alignment there. Germany, anything to add to that, or did I just
No,
point that
you
out?
summed it up very well. It's the same thing with the backup testing, right? We will typically include all of those results and those RTOs that Zach brought up earlier. We'll include those as part of the policies as we're building them out. So everything is on record. Here's our policies, and here are technical steps that we have in place to take care of it. So
Nice. So let's move on to scenario 4. Chemical spill. So now it's a much more localized issue that you're dealing with, but you cannot get physical access to your building for 10 days. And I put this in here because this too was a real life scenario that we had a client go through. It was about 10 years ago. And the reason the time frame is important is because at the time, they still had a traditional PBX phone system, which was for those of us that have been doing this for a while, you buy the phone system, it gets mounted in a closet, connected to a bunch of traditional phone lines typically. But in order to administer that phone system, they had to have physical access to it. It was not administered over via the cloud like a voice over IP solution. And so the challenge that they had as an organization was that they could not get to their phone system to forward the primary numbers or extensions to cell phones or anything else. And their phones basically went unanswered for 2 weeks. And it became nearly a business catastrophic ending event because they had to manually try to reach out to vendors and clients and let them know what was going on without having a way to access their phone system. So, when creating, preparedness plans, Germany, how does your team kind of take a look at these sorts of risks and make sure that technology solutions like voice over IP phone systems that can be administered via the cloud, if you can't, without needing to be within physical proximity of a device, play into that sort of planning to avoid those sorts of issues?
yeah, of course, Dave. So as part of the onboarding for the compliance package here at Sourcepass, for the risk advisory, as I said before, our first thing we like to do is that risk assessment. We want to get to know your organization on a new level. We want to know exactly how you're working and what those critical areas are. So by conducting that risk assessment, we're really able to identify any gaps that we might find pertinent for to put on the roadmap to be able to review and make some decisions around. Hey, if you've got phone systems that you rely on for critical business information, if something were to happen to your environment and you weren't able to get to those phones, what kind of an impact would that have on your organization? If it's critical, it likely would be a very high impact. So being able to identify, even like you said, Dave, those phone systems, if we have a cloud-based phone solution, we know that we'll be able to reroute those calls and be able to access them still, even if we don't have physical access to the actual locations. So it's all about that planning, right? It will depend on your environment and what your organization does, but we like to tailor our assessments to make sure that we're covering you for everything that your organization may need to adhere to and may face as a threat or a potential threat in the future. Another thing that we would be looking into is that remote access. So if we don't have access to the facility, what are we going to do with all of the resources? People may need to go in, have certain materials, or people may just not be able to work from home. So having different remote access plans, whether that be actual remote access from home or having an alternate work site where we can reroute and coordinate in, whether that be another location you have nearby or a site that we could set up just for emergency purposes. Having those plans in place ahead of time is going to save you a lot of headache compared to having a chemical spill happen and then walking into the facility and realizing that you can't get in and no one can, right? It's going to put you down. So being able to plan, be proactive, and this goes the same with vendors. You may have vendors that are sending you equipment to that location. You may have to coordinate and have a plan, a supply chain plan ahead of time to be able to say, hey, unfortunately, we're not able to take anything at this location. This is the critical supplies that we need, and it needs to be sent here. So being able to have those planned out ahead of time to know exactly who you need to go to and what steps you need to take to be able to mitigate any risk or potential loss events is always important. When it comes to chemical spills, I should say, we have to think about it from other perspectives as well, because a chemical spill is going to involve environmental agencies. So there's that whole other aspect of it. We're going to have to follow certain protocols to make sure that we're following their guidelines for proper cleanup. So we have OSHA, the EPA, and we may just need to have those guidelines documented. So if this does happen, we know exactly who to reach out to, we know where to report, and we know who to get in touch with to help us get that process underway to get the process going to get us back in the office and clean it up according to their guidelines. When it comes to the chemical spill as well, just like any other scenario, really, the top priority is going to be the resources. You're humans, right? Everyone working for you, it's life. So that's always going to be top priority. So making sure that they also have some type of communication or hotline to be able to be prepared, to know what's going on. So it's not everyone's wondering when we're going back to work, where we're working, what we're supposed to be doing in the meantime. Having those communications already there ahead of time to let everyone know, hey, you'll be getting an emergency alert on your phones or emails giving you updates is always a great thing to have. So that's what we're there for. We help you identify everything you should have in place, from the employee safety and communication aspect to the compliance and regulatory to making sure your data is protected and documented, and having those alternative work sites in place for extended long periods of times and disruptions that may not be 1 or 2 days to deal with. So we spend a lot of time doing that. Like I said, as part of that first onboarding, that's our main concern, is just making sure we are being proactive instead of reactive when it comes down to it.
Nice. Excellent. And let's move on to our fifth scenario, which Anna kind of foreshadowed a little bit earlier. Disgruntled employee, the enemy within. So an employee decides that they've had it and they try to delete all of the data that they have access to, whether it's shared in platforms like SharePoint and Teams or their personal OneDrive and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about the ways we can prevent this from happening. I guess first from an identification standpoint, I guess we'll start with Germany. Are there ways that risk advisory kind of works with clients to help identify potential risk points of like where critical data lives, and really helps to determine which data we need to put the most protection around? And then we'll kick it to Zach to talk a little bit about technically how we might be able to accomplish a little bit of that.
Yeah, of course. So as part of the advisory, I've mentioned a couple times that risk assessment that we do is to identify gaps and point out anything that we find might be a vulnerability or something that should be on the radar. We do technical data gathering, and as part of that technical data gathering, we identify sensitive information on any systems. We also identify all the groups and roles on the systems to just go over user review. So we do a user review to make sure that whoever is in the system should be there, and whoever should be there has access to only the things that they should have access to. So that's part of the proactive part coming from the risk advisory. We identify any sensitive data we find, and we also try to ensure that, at least from our perspective, only people who should have access to the data are set up with the access.
Nice. And so Zach, you know, I know there's some technologies you can leverage. In fact, we've got a couple of different ways to accomplish it. Maybe talk to us a little bit about data loss prevention, what that's all about.
Actually, I think Germany
Or
was
Germany. Yeah, Germany.
Yeah.
You were going to touch on this actually.
I can touch on that. So, as part of our recommendations, when we do a risk assessment and we identify those groups and the security behind them and who has access to what and what data is there, one of the things that we might recommend, depending on what framework, what environment, and what kind of data that you're dealing with, is data loss prevention. This is really the purpose of data loss prevention, as you can kind of read here, but it's really to monitor and control how sensitive data is accessed, shared, or transferred, ensuring compliance and regulatory requirements, but also making sure that if we do have IT liaisons or an IT team, they're able to respond to these alerts, and whether that be, hey, this is fine, you're taking precautions, you're encrypting this data, you're sending it to other people in the organization or those with access, that may be fine. But if you don't, data loss prevention can also block certain things. So if there is something that we don't want sent out, we can set in certain rules. And if that pops up, we can have an alert sent to our team or an IT liaison that either blocks it, removes it, or gives the user the reason why it's being blocked. So we're able to kind of have that control. And if we do have things like an insider threat who is trying to exfiltrate large amounts of data that we find to be sensitive, it will actually stop them from doing it and alert the team to be able to review it and make sure that there isn't something suspicious or a threat happening here on the system.
Right. And this is particularly applicable for certain industries. Again, I've been doing this for a long time, and I wish I had $1 for every time the managing partner of a law firm asked for these sorts of solutions, because one of their biggest fears is that a junior attorney is going to take all of their client information and go to another firm. These sort of technologies get applied for a lot of different reasons. Two of the law firms we work with in particular historically that specifically put this in place was to protect intellectual property. They were IP lawyers. So the risk wasn't just that they were concerned about an employee leaving and taking a client. It was that they were taking pre-patent proprietary information of their clients out of their control. So depending on your industry, if you deal with that sort of data, that you really need to make sure that you prevent any sort of unauthorized access, copy, or movement. These solutions can be absolutely critical. Awesome.
Completely agree with that. Things like HIPAA, I know is a big one. New York Department of Financial Services or Title 23 and GLBA, anything with financial records. It's something that really I recommend everybody do if they're dealing with that kind of information. So,
excellent. So as we start to wrap up here, I just want to remind you, we have the Q&A open. If you have any questions, feel free to start popping some questions in there for us. We'll have the panel address them. But first, we wanted to transition out of the discussions of the different scenarios and offer a couple of success stories that kind of show how the teams kind of work together to lead to positive outcomes. Didn't have time to create one on the whole incident that happened this morning, but maybe next time we'll add that one in here as well. So the first is an incident response success story, and it really shows what happens when bad actors engage a prepared environment and how they can get thwarted at every turn. So without getting into the super technical detail, the security incident and event monitoring platform, which is what SIEM or SIEM or SIM, depending on who you speak to, what that stands for. Basically, that tool set ended up picking up that there was a credential theft, that basically user credentials had been compromised. There were signs of unauthorized access that got triggered, which kicked Anna's team into kind of motion. They ended up, through various data loss protection policies that were in place, had indications that file transfers were attempted but denied. The bad actor then started to try to stage ransomware and implement it within the environment. That was denied as well because the client had zero trust in place with our Threat Locker platform that prevented unauthorized software from running. Those defenses gave the incident response team enough time to be able able to respond defensively and force password resets for all of the users. So the bad actor ultimately lost their access to the environment, and the client experienced zero downtime and no data loss for that incident because we had the tools in place to detect, respond, and we didn't even need to get to recovery because we were able to turn the bad guy away before they were able to implement any sort of event into the environment. Another big success story that we had was with our NOC team. We had a client who had one of those physical server failures. Their Hyper-V host went down due to a hardware failure. And the NOC team ended up bringing up that environment in the Acronis Disaster Recovery Cloud, allowing users to connect on a, what I always like to say is a limp-along basis. It's designed to allow critical access to critical data. It's not designed to run forever. But what was neat about it was as more users started to access that emergency platform, we could actually improve their experience on the fly by allocating more virtual memory and CPU resources to make sure that the end users had a positive experience. And then following the repair of the physical device on premise, we were able to fail back to the local device back in the environment and do so while the users were still accessing data in the cloud. From beginning to end, the entire event took about 8 hours, and the users had access to information through the entire failed server experience. So with a properly prepared environment, you can build some resilience and put your planning and monitoring and recovery kind of in lockstep to yield decent results. So I'm just checking the Q&A. We don't have any questions that have been posted out there. This isn't Ask Me Anything, so if you have a question about things that we talked about or anything else, we'd be happy to address for you as well. You can pop a question in there. While I wait to see if anything comes in, I'm just going to remind you again, the 4 of us that you can speak to, I can answer any big picture questions you got. Germany's our risk advisory expert. Anna's an incident response, and Zach is from network operations and the backup side. So feel free to ask us anything. And while you think that through, just a couple notes. Our next virtual training event is in our learning series. On December 11th, we're going to have a session about optimizing workflow with OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. This is kind of a capstone to our learning series here in 2024. We've previously run sessions on introduction to OneDrive, introduction to Teams, and just last month was introduction to SharePoint. And so now what we're doing is putting those introductory concepts together to really talk about how to leverage those platforms in concert. If you are planning to attend December, you can feel free to drop in and register in advance for that to do so. But if you want to watch those recordings of the previous sessions, do visit our video library that I talked about at the outset, because you can watch those introduction sessions to best prepare you for the December session. This digital transformation series, which are a little bit more in-depth technical discussions, are going to take a break in December with the upcoming holidays. But do keep an eye on our events page and on your email inbox for invites for new sessions starting in January. We'll be continuing the series accordingly. There have been no questions asked, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap this up. We are literally less than a minute to exactly 1 hour, which is the target. So I want to thank Germany, Anna, and Zach for bringing their expertise to the call today. Good representation of the subject matter expertise we have throughout the org and throughout their departments. If we can be of any help on these topics or otherwise, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. Any final parting shots, Zach, Anna, or Germany?
Feel free to reach out to me whenever, guys. I'm always here, so.
Awesome. Hey, thanks everybody for hanging out with us today. Enjoy yourself a great Thanksgiving holiday next week. If you're watching this, that's not a recording and that's still applicable. And enjoy your time. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a good one. Bye-bye.